Hello and welcome to the Rugby Show here on the 42.ie. We are coming at you live after a disappointing day for the Irish women's team. Defeat Australia in their 5th place playoff semi-final. Joining me, Gavan Casey, to dissect the tournament is still the legend, Lynne Cantwell. Lynne, you made an interesting point yesterday on RTE, and you actually kind of recoiled when I repeated it back to you earlier, that Ireland were kind of robbed of their opportunity a little bit in this tournament. And I kind of understood, I think, where you were coming from, which was not to absolve players of blame at all, but that their surroundings, the environment in which they were operating, perhaps wasn't optimal for a tournament of this magnitude on home soil. What do you make of it now, looking back on that, I suppose, a 4-game sequence of disappointing performances?
Yeah, I think it's really disappointing, and I think fundamentally the girls are going to be most disappointed with their performance, because they know that they could have brought more, they know that they could have been more competitive, etc. And obviously they're the first ones to bear the brunt of the impact that has on Ireland, because they felt like the ambassadors, the campaigners, to be able to try and increase participation numbers and try and get more players involved in the game and sponsors attracted to the game, etc. So the players definitely going to be most disappointed. They will take a lot of the blame themselves, because ultimately 15 players on the pitch have to be able to dictate how a game goes. I think the issue being, and they're more than aware of this, will be that it's the 4th performance in a row that's an underperformance, and as a result there has to be a deep exploration as to why that did happen, and that can't just fall completely on the players, because to there we look at coaching and that's and you know the coaches that are there, the Tom Tierneys that are there, they are a victim also to just a lack of coaching development that's been there for years and years and years, you know, that has been highlighted, etc. And hopefully that will be reviewed, and then ultimately we talk about the whole structure itself and the preparation for this World Cup, and that comes into question or discussion around their friendlies and it's all of those things. So I suppose when we say robbed of an opportunity, yes, there was an opportunity, and therefore we look to what environment and what structures were put in place for this World Cup, and therefore if they weren't good enough, then the players that are presently there have been robbed of an opportunity. But that's not to say that the players don't take huge responsibility for what's happened in this World Cup so far. Yeah,
I suppose if we look at, I don't think we need to spend too long actually kind of looking at the performance yesterday or the result even. Some of the things that stuck out to me were, firstly, Sharni Williams, the Australian 12, how simple it was for her to attack the 10-12 channel or the 12-13 channel and get a simple offload off, and Australia are through on first phase and score twice from it. I think Mahalia Murphy, the second one, and Sarah Reardon, or I think in Australia Sarah Riordan as they call her, it just seemed so basic. You made the point to me earlier before we came on, how in a tournament like this and playing sport at this level, and rugby in particular at this level, like to concede off first phase like that, it just points to something that, like a kind of a disorganisation that really the players will have expected better of themselves in that regard, and also us watching on. We've seen this Ireland team not succumb to these types of scores before, and it does point to a kind of some sort of a disconnect between, I don't know, is it coaching or what they're being instructed to do and what they're trying to do themselves maybe.
Yeah, that's it. I suppose when you see a failure in a defensive structure, you look fundamentally to the structure itself, and then in the going beyond that, you look to the confidence of the players and, you know, the keys of the cohesiveness of the players. So from a structural point of view, obviously you'll have your defensive system. Your defensive system is structured so that you are able to combat anything that comes into your channel, or any threat or any unpredictability that happens in the attack, so that you can snuffle that out. You know, so that's your job. Obviously, the reason why it happens less commonly or rarely in first phase attack is because you know exactly who's on your inside, you know exactly who's on your outside, you know what they sound like, you know what it feels like for them to be close, you know when to push, you know when to bite in, etc. So for that to happen in first phase, yes, it's credit to Sharni Williams. She's had a brilliant tournament. She's a very, very strong player. However, she's against Opiu, which is her strength, is to be able to just, you know, put in big hits similar to Jen Murphy. So I suppose the fact that she was making ground, and they made ground continuously in that channel, and, you know, well done them for keeping going down that channel, because they're obviously they're getting some change from it, is potentially an unfamiliarity with defensive systems, which I doubt, because that should be tried and tested, but it is something that we've seen quite a lot of, in the lack of line speed and missed tackles and stuff like that. So there's definitely some kind of just technical issues in there, as well as fourth game in. As we say, we know that this is Sene's bread and butter. Confidence must be just chipping away, and confidence in the team, because the one thing when you are unconfident you want is for the players inside and outside of you to talk and say, I am here, I have your player, just so that you've got some form of sense of support. If you're not confident in making up your first tackles, if you have two people, you're going to make that tackle. So there's probably a little bit of just technical stuff, and then just that lack of cohesiveness, and then just a bit of confidence. So kind of a couple of things going on there. Yeah,
and like you mentioned, how you want players inside and outside of you to I suppose to bolster your own confidence. And I think as well, when it's a player like Sene, who's hugely influential, and I think a player in that team that a lot of her fellow players would look up to, like Sharni Williams' own try, she kind of half sells a dummy. Sene, I'm not even sure if Sene bought it or was kind of caught off guard. She doesn't really commit to a tackle. She ends up just following Sharni around to the corner. Australia are over. And I think when you're looking at that happening to influential players, particularly for some of the younger players in the squad, they're thinking, all right, this isn't our tournament. You know what I mean? Like that, if our leaders aren't necessarily standing up, be it through their own fault, like that's the thing. I don't think it's lack of effort. I think that, as you were mentioning, their belief was just completely dissipated at that point. I wonder, looking at just again the simplicity of how Australia broke down Ireland's defence, actually in both games, that I was struck by how Hugh Cahill from RT was doing the World Rugby commentary for the game yesterday, and he and his Australian co-commentator literally predicted the move that Australia were going to do, that they scored off with Sarah Reardon's try. And I just wonder, after that happening and it being, I think, patently obvious to a lot of onlookers, for it to happen a second time, like the people on the sideline, how they're not communicating this, and this is with a halftime break, bear in mind, how they're not communicating it to the players, or how even the leaders within that team aren't pointing and saying, we need to adapt here, we need to change something, because it's just going to keep happening. And it did. It happened for the entire game, that they just blew us over. Yeah, well, that's it. I suppose when players are playing within themselves, which we've seen a bit of in this tournament, it's still necessary to pull yourself out of yourself. Like, that's the skill set of it. Like, historically, athletes always go within themselves. That's just a challenge of elite sport, of every sport. We've all felt it, even at underage football on a Sunday morning, something goes wrong. 50% of the time, 50% of the players on any pitch are going through a hard time because something's happened bad. Sure. So it's about, how do you personally bring yourself out of it? If you can't do it, that's something you have to work on, but how do your players bring you out of that, etc. So I think we just saw probably just a huge snowball effect of that, and we just saw lots of just inconsistencies. And as I said before, then you're just firefighting. You're just trying to correct something that went wrong from the play before, correcting something that went wrong, correcting something, instead of being in control of the situation and actually dominating your defence, which will obviously snuffle their attack. Yeah, so moving away from the players then slightly, and touching upon what we said at the start, where this might have been partially, at least, a kind of a systemic problem. You mentioned preparation, and this has kind of been, I think, a fairly prevalent theme throughout Ireland's struggles in this tournament, that preparation was far from optimal. You and Fiona Steed mentioned, like, the warm-up games yesterday, for example. What do you think, maybe it's too soon and there will be obviously performance reviews, but where do you think they went wrong at preparation? Or even in terms of the warm-up games, what would you have done differently if you were the one trying to make these fixtures to get a squad ready for this tournament? Yeah, like, it is hard to know, and you are dead right. So the players are going to have to and can only answer themselves what went on, and the coaches can only answer themselves what went on, and anybody involved, the management structure, etc., and what went on, and genuinely the answers will be there. We can technically only speculate, and it's probably not helpful. I suppose what we base our speculations on is yes, previous experience, which yes is hugely important, because I've been to 5 World Cups, four 15s and 1 7th World Cup. So yes, you have knowledge there from what it's actually very, very sensitively like in there. So yes, there's knowledge there, but at the same time, this group of players and this management can only say for themselves, because they are unique, and and they're the next step. I think all it is clear is that the
projected expectations of where they wanted to be, and then the plans that they put in place in order to get there were malaligned. I think that's all it is. So you'd always hope for a review to happen. You hope for a review to happen when a team have done very well as when a team have done poorly, and you hope for a review to happen in order to just gain some insights in order to grow, as opposed to let's look back on what things we didn't spot and what mistakes we made so that we can reprimand people. You know, yes, that is usually what happens, which is not necessarily cool, whereas like a good healthy review process is trying to look at all of the key components and seeing what were the good things, what are the bad things, and what can we tweak and change so that it doesn't happen again, and then we can grow. And that's why pulling on previous experience as well as this stuff is hopefully what will enable it to grow for the next four years.
Yeah, so there's almost a temptation there when you're when there's a post-mortem into these underperformances, that you find a couple of key areas. Here's where we were short, here's where we were short, and you move on, but you're not necessarily fixing anything for the future. It's almost like you're offering yourself an excuse, and not necessarily the players or the coaches, but almost the top brass that are looking at this and reviewing performance.
Well, that's it. Like, you know, they speak about what does success look like, and success can only look very specific to what the group of players and the coaches and the management that you have. And just what success looks like for Canada, what success looks like for New Zealand, for England will look very different, and therefore it has to be specific to your structure. So if you take into consideration all that you have and say, well, what does success look like? And this is a thorough strategy that's been created. You know, this is a huge big brainstorming session, and it takes a lot of expertise and intelligence to be able to kind of create that. It's like, well, what does success look like for us? Okay, this is what it looks like. How do we get there? What resources do we actually have? What is realistic? And then now let's plan it. You know, and even within that, there's probably going to be mistakes, and there's going to be learnings that you'll take into the next one. But at least that's specific to where you're going to and what you have, and then make sure all the players are aligned to that. Because I think what we saw is that's kind of at a strategic level, but what we were seeing continuously from Ireland is a lack of cohesion, but a lack of people on the same page, which is just you know that's definitely not what you want to see in a tournament. But you look at the Australians who only had 6 weeks prep, you see some of the Canadians as well, they didn't have an awful lot of prep, but what you did see is them all on the same page. So it is very, very possible to be on the same page, whereas Ireland weren't. So that's like a cohesive team thing of 15, as well as just that bigger picture stuff too.
Big time, yeah. Keep the comments flowing in, guys. A couple here. We've got one from Elizabeth Hackett, who says, do not be disheartened, ladies. You gave your very best, and it was thrilling watching you. You did us proud. Again, I think, you know, like, effort wasn't the issue. We know that for sure. They will be disappointed themselves, obviously. There's a question here from Jess Keating for you, Lynn. Do you think that the lack of player pool for Ireland's management to choose from comes from the standard of underage into provincial levels and the lack of a proper structure or competition?
Yeah, to Jess, absolutely, and a couple of those things, and most certainly they're highlighted. You know, the union are aware of them too. It's just about trying to build the right type of momentum, right kind of structures, and right type of resources to be able to kind of plug those holes. But fundamentally, what we do know is that players are coming into, and have always come into, the national structure lacking basic skills, because at a club level we don't have the right and caliber of coaching, and I've said this before, is this, you know, we are a volunteer nation. We know the GAA, we know that we have lots of volunteers coaches, which is absolutely fabulous. This is not taken from them whatsoever, but it's having the consistent caliber of coaches to be able to teach technical skills at a basic level, for the girls then to be able to play competitive rugby with these skills and develop them. Then they take the step up to international level. So when they get to international level, that's just, you know, money in the bank, and then they can work on the progressive stuff. But what historically happens is the girls come into the international camp and they're just still lacking the basic skills, and some of them are catch pass, some of them is like scrummaging, some of them is tackling ability, etc. So yes, we look to club level, and that's an easy fix. We look to interprovincial, which should be a step up, which is often not. Again, same problems. That's something about coaching, something about just, you know, technical ability, and then we go even further, whereas where we want to go, and that's just school level. And we definitely know that we have more we have more schools with rugby, etc., but we just don't have a collaborative competition that enables girls and guys to be playing, well, girls more so to be playing at underage level, that then they can step into their club and then they can step into provincial and then they step into international. So there's a couple of layers.
There are a couple, yeah. There's a question from John Mann, and it actually kind of takes us on to what we were going to finish on, which is sort of the legacy of the tournament from maybe Ireland's perspective and then in general. But John asks, is this a step back for women's rugby in Ireland? I suppose more specific to the team's performance than the tournament as a whole. Do you view it now as like a setback, or is it just something that we need to draw a line under and move on from?
Yeah, I think it's a just huge big learning opportunity. That's all. I think we scrutinise the present players because yes, we want and expect more from them as such, but I suppose the reality is that the Irish women's rugby team have only been in the public's eye line for 3 or 4 years, and that's when we won the Grand Slam and we beat New Zealand, etc. But we were making some terrible mistakes for years and years beforehand. We just weren't in the public eye, and yes, we weren't at this stage in world rankings. To be fair, we came from 4th and now we're a little bit less. So yes, that's a wobble, but commonly it's a wobble that triggers an alert and triggers change, and that's what we definitely do want to see, because there's an awful lot more in this squad, in the potential of this whole setup. Yes, it needs to be helped and supported by the union and more kind of information to be able to fuel it, but ultimately it's just getting more players into the game so we have more depth and all of these things we've spoken about already.
Yeah, but I suppose that's the thing as well about having this tournament on home soil, right? You look at the results, ultimately they've been disappointing. The players will be disgusted with themselves and there will be some fallout. But one thing you kind of can't get away from, and it struck me yesterday more so than any other game, was the fans, just a number of young fans in particular. I mean, my 12-year-old sister growing up wouldn't necessarily have had a kind of a hero rugby team to worship, like she'd maybe watch the men's the odd time, but there was something special about having this in Ireland, and the reception that they got yesterday after what was actually almost an embarrassing performance, to be totally honest, and one that again we'll discuss them, but they were still treated like heroes, and you can't help but imagine, regardless of their performance and the result, the fact that they just had it here and offer these young people an opportunity to come to these games at a big tournament, that should have an exponential benefit on the sport over here. Yeah,
absolutely. Oh, look, these girls are heroes. They're huge ambassadors for the sport, and they sacrifice so much of their lives to be able to perform on this stage, and they have given so much. And yes, it's a pity that the last 4 games didn't go their way as such, but take nothing from it. They've done a really good job of it, and it's going to skyrocket the game forward. But like anything, we just need to keep everybody accountable to the standards that we want to go, because we know that there's more in them too, as well as them being brilliant ambassadors as well.
Yeah, big time. Before we go then, Lynne, a word on the tournament as a whole. The standard of rugby, actually, some of the games has been remarkable, and some of the scores as well. We probably haven't necessarily been treated to much of it in Ireland's games, just they've been error-strewn for whatever reason, and I think largely on both sides. But you look at England, you look at New Zealand, and some of the rugby New Zealand were playing, as you were saying to me a minute ago. It's been incredibly entertaining, great to have here, obviously, and I suppose for the women's game globally, we've seen this massive sort of push towards sevens and how much that's improving, and I think this again should be of massive benefit to 15s as well now.
Oh yeah, look, the standard of rugby has been sensational. Yes, the Ireland game was a little disappointing, but then straight into those 2 semi-finals, and oh my God, it was mouthwatering stuff, honestly. So as a rugby kind of supporter, lover, etc., you just watch it, and even we were sitting down, and there's just so many different, just the demographic of people that are attending these games is so different. Even 2-3 years ago, you've got dads bringing daughters, dads bringing sons, which is so different. You've got just guys that are just coming to watch rugby, whereas before it was always just mums and dads and family members. Sure. It was a spectacle, and I think that they had a couple of thousand tickets to spare for last night, but even the stadium still looked full. And you've got such a diverse crowd as well. You've got Canadians, you've got USA, you've got Kiwis, you've got Wallabies,
and you're seeing them walking around Dublin as well. You know what I mean, wearing the jerseys, wearing the colours, going to games, heading out to UCD. It's been brilliant.
Absolutely, it's brilliant. And then I think they've got 2,000 tickets to sell well for Saturday's games, which I'm sure will be gone probably already. And that's going to be like an 18,000 crowd cheering on New Zealand and England in the final now. It's going to be a whopper.
Yeah, big time. And I think during the Ireland-France game, I think it was something like 3.2 million people watched that game in France as well, which is, the game is obviously on the up. We hope Ireland can kind of climb with it. I'm sure they will in due course.
Yeah.
But Lynne, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you over the last couple of weeks. Glad you enjoyed the tournament, and thanks a million for joining us on the Rugby Show. We will speak to you very soon.
Cool.
We will be back as well on Friday here for close calls. We'll be looking ahead to Floyd Mayweather versus Conor McGregor. I'm going to enjoy that one. We'll be joined by Jason Quigley, Eric Donovan, and the UFC's Joseph Duffy as well, former conqueror of McGregor. So do tune in at 4 o'clock here on Facebook Live, or you can catch it afterwards as well. But until then, thanks a million and take it easy.